They don't want to be constructive. They just want to get in the usual political fights back and forth. And sometimes that's fed by all the cable chatter on the media. But you and I know the truth. This country wasn't built just by griping and complaining. It was built by hard work and taking risks.
Well, that was the president today talking about opponents to his agenda, including health care reform legislation. The DNC, the Democratic National Committee, had a different take on the folks at these town hall meetings across the country. Take a listen.
It will break him.
I hope he fails.
This mob activity is straight from the playbook of high-level Republican political operatives. They have no plan for moving our country forward, so they've called out the mob.
Okay, that ad continues. What about this tactic by the White House and the Democratic National Committee? Let's bring in our panel. Michael Barone, senior political analyst for the Washington Examiner. A.B. Stoddard, associate editor of The Hill, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. So this is a line, Michael, the mob in these town hall meetings.
Well, they're trying to demonize the opponents of this by focusing on people shouting at constituent meetings and by demonizing the insurance companies, whom they've actually been quite happy to deal with their lobbyists and to claim support for them when it suited their purposes, but now they're going to be demonized. And the reason is that the support for the Democratic plans has been dropping like a stone. I mean, we've had our persuasive and articulate president out there, the highly skilled leaders in Congress, and support for these plans has gone down. Opposition has gone up. They crossed the line. There's a graph from pollster.com. You can perhaps see that this is, you know, the line has just gone down, and people aren't buying it. Quinnipiac poll today found that by a 57-37 margin, Americans oppose any health care bill which would substantially increase the budget deficit. And support for current health systems, according to pollster Scott Rasmussen, has gone up from less than 50% to well over 50%. People threatened with the government plan have come to appreciate what they've got.
A.B., the president said, you know, this country wasn't built on griping and complaining today. His White House press secretary said these town halls are manufactured events, went as far as saying that. It's just an interesting thing to see the White House operating in this way, isn't it?
There was also some accusation that the people coming to these gatherings are actually representing the interests of the insurance companies, which is really a stretch. They obviously feel that they have to fight back against these mobs because their own members, who they have bewildered in recent weeks with mixed messages and not a lot of leadership from the White House, have come home and can't even be heard at these meetings. Now, I think the problem started weeks before the angry mobs showed up, and that is because there is no program that the leadership has and the White House has been able to send conservative, nervous, moderate, centrist Democrats home with. So when people are talking about a public plan, when they're talking about socialized medicine, there's nothing to push back on. And this problem could have been avoided altogether before we had this scene. But this is democracy in action. There's nothing they can do. The more they complain about it at the White House level, I think the worse it becomes.
Charles.
Well, the White House accuses it of being orchestrated. Orchestrated is a synonym for organized, and I thought that community organizing was a high calling. I mean, our president, he used to deploy it every day when he was as a campaigner as a sign of his altruism. Look, this is unbelievable hypocrisy, and it's because the administration has a hard time defending itself on the merits of the case. The support for health care reform is sinking, and that's because it understands that the people who have, as you unpack what's happening here and what's in the bills, it's a monstrosity. The administration has made a turn in the PR, and you can see it in an op-ed that the Secretary of Health and Human Services had earlier this week in the Post, the Washington Post, in which she mentioned the uninsured in paragraph 1, and then you never heard about them again. It was all about the insured and keeping it and having it and being and making the insurance companies have you keep it. The reason that they have shifted is because that's how you settle it. But the problem is that's not what's in the bills. The bills that are being discussed in the town halls and the bills that have been out there for weeks and the bills that have been drafted and you can read have all this other stuff in there, the mandates and the huge deficits and the new age nonsense of wellness and other stuff that everybody is rejecting, and that's what they're stuck with right now.
The other thing that is perking people's ears, especially on the Republican side, is this call by the White House on the website. If you see anything fishy as far as an email or a web site about healthcare reform that seems fishy, send it to whitehouse.gov. Well, here's what Senator Cornyn, Republican from Texas, said about that. By requesting that citizens send fishy emails to the White House, it is inevitable that the names, email addresses, IP addresses, and private speech of U.S. citizens will be reported to the White House. I can only imagine the level of justifiable outrage had your predecessor asked Americans to forward emails critical of his policies to the White House. I suspect that you would have been leading the charge in condemning such a program, and I would have been at your side denouncing such heavy-handed government action. What about this, Michael?
Well, I think Senator Cornyn's getting a little overwrought about this, but the fact is this should not have come from the White House. This might be legitimate coming from the Democratic National Committee or one of the Democratic AstroTurf groups that are out there. I mean, David Axelrod, the president's chief advisor, was an AstroTurf specialist in terms of organizing groups of people that would come together.
As opposed to grassroots.
Yeah, as opposed to grassroots, but basically I think it's pretty weak as an attempt to intimidate people. But what's fascinating is that when pro-democratic health care groups send out these mass emails and say, show up, come here, show how much you're in favor of the president's position, they get a handful of people. These other groups, or just spontaneous citizens, get huge numbers of people, you know, 150 where the town hall meetings used to get 20 and that sort of thing. The balance of enthusiasm has changed. It favored Obama in 2008. It's working against him now.
That's really the crux here, is that I agree with Michael that this is the kind of activity, this pushback and this solicitation for fishy emails and other information really should be coming from Organizing for America or DNC or one of those other groups. But at the same time, the real problem here is that the left wing of his party, the middle of his own party, are not as engaged, and the Republicans and opponents of reform are.
But Senator Cornyn's point about if it was George W. Bush that asked for emails, and it would have been...
Look, I'm not as sanguine as my colleagues are on this. You know, the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, and now apparently, however, the president will collect emails that contain fishy disinformation. I mean, that's Orwellian language that you expect and get out of Hugo Chavez as he shuts down 100 radio stations. I don't think there's a vast conspiracy of a collection of IP addresses, but a White House ought not be collecting disinformation. Even that language is language that America doesn't use. It's a language of dictators, and the tactic here is Chicago thug politics. It's disgraceful.
I would never describe you as sanguine.
Certainly not on this show. No.
Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is sworn in for a second term as Iranian president, as the American president's top spokesman does a 180 on the Iranian president.